Almost everyone has been affected through the use of recreational marijuana in today's society. Whether it is through direct consumption or those around them consuming this drug, it definitely has had an impact on Americans today. Now, my main concern with marijuana, through my extensive research both for this speech and for the organization that I'm a part of in my high school, Unfiltered Reality, which is a peer group that works to prevent teenagers from using drugs and tobacco, has found that recreational marijuana is not such a great idea. The main controversy within our government today is, should marijuana be legalized for recreation? Should marijuana be legalized for medicinal purposes? Or should it be legal at all? And I am of the opinion that while marijuana might have some medicinal benefits, when used recreationally, the negatives greatly outweigh the positives of this drug. Which brings me to my three main points. Number one is that recreational marijuana use is actually extremely dangerous for the human brain development. Number two, recreational marijuana use creates two distinct gateways that make it an even more dangerous drug. And number three, recreational marijuana has led to actually an increase in crime rates in Colorado. Whereas they were looking for a decrease, the opposite has actually been found. Moving back to my first main point, that recreational marijuana is actually extremely dangerous. This is because recreational marijuana impairs both our memory and our learning capabilities. As far as our memory go, this is actually specific to those who began smoking marijuana in their adolescence, which in fact is the trend in today's society. As I stated, I see teenagers all the time at the high school who come to class high and learn nothing out of their classes. However, this is not the only reason for this. According to a study done by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, memory impairment occurs because of the chemical THC, which is a key component in the drug cannabis, which is the basis for marijuana. This actually alters how information is processed in the hippocampus area of the brain, where memory functions are stored. It alters how the synapses fire within this part of the brain and leads to a memory impairment not only while they are using the drug, but also later in life. And this is a negative for obvious reasons. Without a active working memory, human development is not functionally possible. The second main aspect of this is that marijuana use actually leads to a deterrence in learning. According to Rachel Rettner, a senior writer at Live Science, chronic marijuana use causes inflammation within the brain that leads to an inhibition of learning. And while this study was coordinated mainly in animals, we can also cross-apply this to humans due to other medicinal studies that have been conducted in animals. And the data received there is also effective when studied in humans. What happens here is that the chronic brain inflammation puts pressure on certain parts of the brain that do in fact impact our learning capabilities. In fact, the national IQ of those who recreationally use marijuana on a national level is 8 points lower than those who do not use marijuana at all. This was a study not just conducted in Colorado and Washington, where recreational marijuana is legal, but across the entire nation, where marijuana is in fact illegal. Now, moving on to my second main point, that marijuana actually creates two distinctive gateways that many people might be unaware of. The first distinctive gateway is actually what is considered a reverse gateway. Traditionally, marijuana is seen as a gateway drug in that it leads to the use and addiction to harder drugs. However, some studies have disputed this, but most studies prove that marijuana use has actually led to a rise in tobacco use in teens, whereas historically it has been seen as the other way around. But since teens have been educated on the dangers of tobacco use in recent years, they've actually moved away from tobacco use and into marijuana use. But seeing how marijuana affects decision-making processes, learning and memory processes, teens are now reversing back to seeing as how tobacco is not that big of a deal and comparing it with marijuana. And the report under legalization violations states that teenage usage of tobacco is predicted to actually increase in coming years because of this reverse gateway that marijuana creates. The second gateway that marijuana creates is a gateway towards children access. In fact, by legalizing marijuana for those who are 21 and older, it allows them to connect with their friends who are just 3 years younger, who they may have known when they were a senior in high school and the younger friend was a freshman in high school. Now, this leads to an easy gateway access for those seniors in high school to obtain marijuana illegally and use it on a chronic basis. They then can take that marijuana and filter it down through their other friends who are younger than them. And this is a trend that we can predict to happen in the next few years, because this is exactly what happened with tobacco use 5 to 10 years ago. And since marijuana is the drug choice now, this is in fact a likely possibility. Now, lastly speaking, the crime rates have actually risen in Colorado, a state which had legalized marijuana initially in order to try and combat rising crime rates. This is highly ironic because, as I said, part of the point in legalizing Colorado for marijuana was to prevent crime rates. However, they've actually risen, most specifically in vehicular crashes. One proponent for the legalization of recreational marijuana is that it doesn't cause death. No one has ever died just on marijuana. However, from 2006 to 2011, drivers who had been under the influence of marijuana the number of crashes that drivers under the influence of marijuana caused more than doubled in just those 6 years. And this is only leading up to the legalization of marijuana. Since then, according to a report done on the marijuana legalization in Colorado, these numbers have been expedited even further, and vehicular fatalities, that is where someone dies or comes very near to death in a car crash, have risen even further since the recreational legalization of marijuana. In addition, the other crime rate that has risen drastically is, again, teenage consumption of marijuana. I know I keep bringing up the teenage aspect, but as a teenager in today's society, this is a topic that concerns me greatly. Youth marijuana use has risen to over 25% on the average in Colorado, whereas previously it had been 5 to 10%. And this is since the legalization of recreational marijuana, which is how we can tie in point 2, that teenagers are in fact obtaining this drug from their older friends, and they are using it within their high schools. Now, in conclusion, legalizing recreational marijuana is a terrible idea because not only is recreational marijuana more dangerous than teenagers are aware of, it also opens 2 distinctive gateways that lead to even further problems, and it has allowed crime rates in Colorado to rise drastically, whereas crime rates were supposed to drop off. Marijuana is a drug that has negatively affected thousands of Americans across the United States, but especially teenagers, and it should not be legalized for recreational use.